Hey, it's Jesse from the Biggest Guys Locker Room. You guys ever thought about starting your own podcast? Whether it be for business, personal, or simply talking about the things you love? Well, I can honestly say when we started our podcast, it was the best decision and it's the most fun we've ever had. But starting a new podcast can be overwhelming at times. And that's where Buzzsprout comes in. Buzzsprout is the best way to start your own professional podcast. They're so good, they've already helped out over 100,000 podcasters get their message out to the world. Buzzsprout offers you so many tools, like a great-looking podcast website, audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, and tools to promote your episodes, and more and more and more. Buzzsprout even gets your show listed on every major podcast platform, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. They provide so many tools to help you get started with tutorials on YouTube, podcast tutorials, everything you may need to get your journey started. So if you're looking to start your professional podcast today, follow the link in the show notes. This lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you and help support our show. Buzzsprout, the easiest way to start a podcast. All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Biggest Guys Locker Room. We got a special guest today. We're talking hockey, and our friend Rick is in the house. How we doing, bud?
We're doing good.
Yeah.
How you doing, Jess?
Well, it could be better with a couple more VJK wins, but we'll get into that in a little bit later.
Yeah, how do you like that? 3 straight home losses. When can you remember that happening?
Can we just play on the road? But anyways, Rick is here to help us talk a little bit of hockey. We're in the middle of the hockey season. Trade deadline is coming ahead. We're going to talk about some of that. But first, listen, we'll get into who's the biggest surprises, your top 3 surprises, and teams-wise for the season, and why are they a surprise to you?
I'd say first, we knew Vancouver was good and improving, but we didn't know they were this good. Okay, I mean, this team is they're just loaded. You look at they have a defenseman who has 57 assists.
Oh yeah,
in Quinn Hughes.
Oh, he's
awesome. I mean,
awesome.
that just shows you right there the type of production they're getting with JT Miller and Elias Pettersson. I mean, these guys, they're both going to have 40 goals probably. Brock Besser, they could have 3 40-goal scorers, that team.
And JT Miller, he's really taken off. He's having a career year, and he's been around the block. It's not like he's a spring chicken.
No, he's a veteran, but they've just put together a great team, and Demko is solid in the net, and they're going to be a force. They're going to be difficult to handle. I think they're a surprise in that respect that we knew they were getting better, but I don't think we knew they were going to be this good.
Yeah, I mean, Rick Tocchet, he has done a heck of a job ever since taking that job over. I know he was a candidate to take over VGK before we went with Bruce, and he has done an amazing job there in Vancouver with that team.
Yes, he has. And I think another coach, when you talk about a little bit surprising, is Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
They are, again, Tortorella, another really good coach. You figured it would take him 2 or 3 years to get that team turned around, but he's turned that team around pretty quick. Yep. And they're the type of team, they're kind of built for playoff hockey because they don't mind playing 2-1, 1-0, 3-2. They don't mind playing those games. With the type of team that forechecks like they do, they're going to be a tough out in the playoff. And they are a playoff team at this time. So I think they're a little bit of a surprise because they really don't have the players yet, but they're playing like a playoff team.
They don't have those guys that catch headlines. They don't have those big names on that team. And I believe they're third in the Atlantic, correct? I think that was the last I saw.
They're third, and if you ever watch them, they're like an annoying team to play. They're on you constantly. So they play as a unit, and wherever they're just constantly, there's no space. Mm-hmm. And that's the way Tortorella, he preaches that time and space, don't give the players space to operate. And he's got everybody playing that way. So they're another bit of a surprise to me, just how quickly they've turned it around. And I think we could also look at surprises on disappointing teams. Mm-hmm. And a disappointment, I think the Kings would be a disappointment at this time. They had to fire their coach, but they kind of looked like they were going to take the next step, but they've taken a step backwards. And I know some of the people that I know down in LA were not happy with some of the moves they made in the off season. They let a couple, good role players go, and it seems like they've kind of lost their way. But there's still time, and they're still on the bubble, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's a great team, because it was funny when they started tearing it down. Everybody thought this would be a couple-year rebuild, and they kind of bounced back rather quickly last year and looked like they'd be a threat this year, and so far it hasn't really panned out for them.
No. With certain players are getting older. We know Kopitar he's a Hall of Famer, but he's got a lot of years under his belt. We don't know how much longer he has. You just have a team with some veterans that have been around a long time, and maybe they're just starting to get tired. It's tough. You see some of these players playing 15, 16, 17 years, and it takes its toll.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, it was surprising to see how quickly they bounced back from their rebuild, because they had a really disappointing year. Was it 2 or 3 years ago? And they've really come along strong in their rebuild. So they got some good young talent on that team. I just don't think they've taken the next step as far as in their careers yet. But I think that team's is one to watch out for. I believe they're 3 points out of third, right behind Edmonton.
Yeah, they're on the bubble, but having to fire their coach, they kind of like their coach there, and they weren't real happy that they had to get rid of him, but you know how that goes. Mm-hmm. But Drew Doughty's still putting in 20, 24, 25 minutes a game, and they're just a little thin when it comes to the blue line in goal. They haven't had the goaltending that they wanted.
Yeah.
So overall, they're, to me, a little bit of a disappointment. I thought they'd be a little more, probably in the top 3. They still have a chance, but we'll see what happens there.
Mm-hmm. What's another disappointing team you've seen this year?
Well, disappointing, here's another team that was supposed to kind of be getting better, is Anaheim, and they've been terrible. They're the same old Anaheim Ducks, and they're looking to unload a couple players now. Probably Adam Henrique he's going to go at the trade deadline somewhere.
I heard reports of Trevor Zegras being a possible.
Well, Zegras is he's one of those talented players. He's a guy that Cassidy would not like, because
he doesn't play defense.
He won't play D. He's uncoachable. He makes some stupid mistakes at times, but he's a highlight reel too sometimes. So, he's one of those types, but that's not the type you need to really
he sells tickets. Yeah. His name sells tickets, that's for sure. And I'm sure he sells merchandise, because like you said, he's a walking highlight reel. He's one of those guys that every NHL commercial you see, one of Zegras' plays in there.
Yeah, he's kind of, Eichel had a bit of a reputation before he came here, and look, he's become a 200-foot player now. But Zegras doesn't seem to be coachable in that respect. These guys that score at every level in their hockey careers, they've scored, 40, 50 goals, and now they get to the NHL and they forget that you got to play defense too. Mm-hmm.
And maybe a change of scenery for Zegras, maybe that gets him on track. Maybe that's a kick in the butt to get him going in the right direction, because he does have talent. It's just so far you can't find the right person to get it out of him. So. But yeah, right. Anaheim is a big disappointment. There was one question I wanted to ask you about. What is and get your take on this, because we've all been kind of waiting for Ottawa and Buffalo to kind of take off, because we know they've got really great young talent, and it just seems like neither team can get there. I don't know why. Is it coaching? Is it something goaltending they're not getting in? What are your thoughts on those two?
I think coaching is a big part of it, because you have to find the type of coach that is going to instill those habits of playing defense. And Buffalo they just don't play defense. And then they don't draft, when it comes to the draft, they're so thin at the blue line, but when they go out and draft, they'll draft a forward, or they're just not filling those spots they need to fill to play D. And I know sometimes it's not popular, it's not flashy, it's not exciting, but you have to find those hard-nosed players that'll play defense and go in the corners and, help clear out the front. And it just seems like teams like Buffalo, Ottawa, like you said, even Detroit. Detroit has a ton of talent.
Mm-hmm.
Detroit is an exciting team.
Yeah.
But until they learn how to make it a little easier on their goalie, it's going to be hard for them to win consistently. So, yeah, I agree that there's a lot of teams with talent. Then you look at, like you said, Philly. It's hard to name one or two players on that team.
Exactly.
But they play as a unit,
mm-hmm.
and they're very difficult to play against.
Yeah, it was so fun. I think I was watching the Ottawa game and just seeing some of the names you see, because it's not just full of young players. Like Buffalo, you kind of have just this young, talented team. Ottawa's got a nice mix, and like you see, like Tarasenko is now on a trade block. He hasn't been the same since being injured in St. Louis.
Right.
Claude Giroux, of course, you got him there. It just seems like you would think there'd be a little more veteran leadership getting that team going, and I just haven't seen it out of Ottawa.
No, Claude Giroux, he seems like, you thought he'd be a flyer his whole career,
mm-hmm.
and maybe he's just playing out the rest of his career, because with Philly, he was a fixture there. Maybe once they leave that team they thought they'd play their whole career for, they kind of lose their juice, some of them. So playing up in Ottawa, maybe he's just not as motivated. Some of these guys near the end of their career, they're just trying to still stay in the league and make some money.
And try to finish it out, get to the finishing line.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, like we talked about, there's a lot of these talented players on some of these talented teams. Who in your mind are the buyers and who are the sellers coming up with this upcoming trade deadline here in a couple weeks?
Well, Calgary they were looking like they were kind of going to go for it and make a run to try and make the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's looking like they're going to be sellers. You look for Noah Hanifin to probably be dealt in the next 2 weeks, and he's definitely a frontline forward
mm-hmm.
that can do some damage. He's a good player. He could put the puck in the net. I think Calgary's just one team that they looked like they were kind of undecided what they wanted to do, but I think you might see a couple of their players go in the next 2 weeks somewhere. Yeah. And I think Pittsburgh's definitely. I think Guentzel's gone. Mm-hmm. I think Guentzel's going to end up somewhere, because they're right at that point where a rebuild is coming. So, it's hard to think of the Penguins rebuilding, but
it's tough. It's tough, because Sidney Crosby and that whole core still there. That's an older team, and going through a rebuild. And you got a lot of older guys on some, long contracts. They're not on their last years. They've got a couple more seasons of these guys with Carlson and Malkin, Crosby, and Letang.
Yep.
Those guys they're up there in their age, and I saw that an ex-Golden Knight who was traded there after the Cup was Riley Smith. He looks like he's probably going to be moved here, because he is, of course, on his last year of his contract, and that's part of the reason BJK had walked away from him and moved on from him to get a young player signed and free up that $5 million cap space.
Riley Smith, he started the year a top 6 guy for them.
Mm-hmm.
After a month or two, he was no longer in the top 6. I just think the Penguins they're in for probably a couple of years of rebuilding there, especially if how long some of these players are going to be there, or do they want to cash their chips in and get a bunch of draft picks and start the process.
That's my curiosity. How would you think somebody like Sidney Crosby or Malkin would be willing to move to have another run at the Cup?
Well, we never thought Gretzky would ever leave Edmonton. These things you think can never happen, they can happen.
Yeah, that whole great Edmonton team in the 80s, they all moved on. Coffee.
Right, they all. Messier goes and he wins the Stanley Cup with the Rangers, and those are guys you would think, how could Edmonton ever let them go? But
you had 5. Your starting 5 was all Hall of Famers in Edmonton. There. Yeah.
I know it's a long time ago, but still that exists. Where if a player's valuable, and you could start getting some draft picks and looking to get young, then sometimes you don't want to wait too long. So it could happen. I think Pittsburgh's a candidate for that, and I think Calgary, you're going to see them unload some players in the next 2 weeks.
I know, yeah, Hanifin, like you brought up Hanifin. I know Hanifin's contract is going to be a little difficult for them to move him. I know he's on the last year's contract. He's got a no trade clause, so I believe he can go with a no trade for 8 teams. So that might make it a little tough to move him. I think Chris Tanev, who's also on the last year's contract, I think you can move him. Markstrom.
Markstrom
could be another. I think it's going to be a dumpster sale in Calgary. They just ever since Gaudreau and Tkachuk left, it hasn't been the same there in Calgary, unfortunately. Yeah, Florida definitely got the better of that trade, didn't they? Holy smokes!
Yes, I was. Just being here in Las Vegas, I was hoping we would get Tkachuk, but we didn't go after him.
Yeah, he's a great player to kind of get you that. He brings that mentality, that toughness to the team that you need that. You need that to win playoff games. You got to have that guy who's willing to mix it up.
Well, you hate him when he's not on your team, and you love him if he's on your team.
He's like Brad Marchand. You can't stand the rat if he doesn't play for your team, but if he plays for you, you love the guy.
That's it. Yeah.
So
I know some players. Those are usually the guys, the physical guys. I know the league's changed a little, but the physicality aspect of it, when people watch hockey regular season and then all of a sudden they watch a playoff game, it's like 2 different games. Once the playoff starts, the games become extremely physical. And if you're not made for that, then, you're not going to last very long.
No, and folks, if you guys don't believe us, look at the hit stats during a regular season game, and then look at what the hit stats are in a playoff game. They triple. I mean, they don't just double; they triple in the amount of hits. These guys, listen, the playoff hockey, it's a whole nother season.
Yep. Yes, it is.
So, who do you think will be the buyers? Some of these guys we talked about, we looked at the teams that are selling. Who do you think is going to be buying here at the trade deadline?
Well, the interesting thing is just in the last day or two, the Golden Knights, you would think they were not buyers at all up until all of a sudden,
Mark
they
Stone
lose their
goes
captain.
down. Yep.
They lose Mark Stone for maybe till the end of the year. We don't know.
Yeah.
Like last year. So maybe they are going to go looking for, and they've had trouble scoring with Eichel out and Stone out. You can't go on a losing streak in March, and you could all of a sudden find yourself looking up at the playoffs. And even though they look like they're comfortably in a playoff spot, it's not a given.
No.
I mean, you can't just all of a sudden. They've had a rough last week or two, and they need to find their game. They need to find ways for these younger players to contribute. So, but they could be buyers. They could actually go. They've shown in the past they're not afraid to go after a player. So you never know.
Yeah. Who else do you think?
Also, I think Vancouver seems to be all in. They're serious. They're looking to fill any hole they might have because they feel this is their year. So they could still be buyers. And in the East, I think Boston is looking for. They're still looking for another forward. The East is extremely. I mean, when you look at Carolina, Boston, Toronto, the East looks very strong this year, and I think the West, it's a little top heavy, but I think Boston is going to try and make a move for a forward, and I think Carolina might too.
Yeah, I think you're right there because looking at the East standings and it's anybody's game right now. Anybody can move from spot to spot. Rather, as like you said, the West, everybody's kind of sitting kind of idle right now, and you really going, okay, nobody's really going to threaten for the playoffs unless somebody really makes a big move. But in the East, man, you go on a small losing streak, you could be looking at yourself on the bubble all of a sudden.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. March, everything ramps up, everything ratchets up, and we'll see what happens. But segue into the Golden Knights situation, they're starting to show. I mean, we knew we were missing. You're missing Eichel. You're missing Theodore for a long time. Now you're missing Stone. So it's good. You're scoring. You're going to have trouble with the score consistently. But the thing the Knights have always banked on is their defense and their goaltending can carry them through when they're having scoring droughts, and they could win games 2-1, 3-1. But just recently they've shown a little bit of a problem with their goaltending. Actually, Aiden Hill the other night, he let up some weak ones that are very uncharacteristic for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Pietrangelo's got a lot of time where, he's been in the league a long time too. The wear and tear. Martinez, the blue line's showing a little bit of wear and tear. They do have some young defensemen that played early in the year that are very good. Pakal and Korzak, and they got Hutton back too. So they are deep there, but they look to me like they're going to have to really dig and scratch to win some low-scoring games, which is kind of if you look at the league lately, the scoring's been crazy, wild. Yeah. Some of these scores are
they're football scores.
They're football scores. I mean, and it's like, what is going on? You look at the goaltending around the league or the defense, and it's like nobody's playing any D.
No.
But the teams that are, like Philly and Carolina, they're going to be set up for the playoffs. Like, they're not going to have to adjust. They're used to playing those games. So
yeah, and touching on with the VJK, talking with and the way they play the style of defense, blocking shots, getting into hustle plays. Do you think maybe because, listen, they made the full run, they win the cup last year, and listen, trying to go back-to-back, that's a lot of hockey in a year's time. You think maybe that's starting to catch up, and maybe just from that long season?
Well, even their blocks are down in the last month. So the willingness to block shots and to make it easier on their goal, it does take its toll. And to be able to do that back to back, I know Cassidy, just listening to his post games, the last few games, you could tell he's not happy.
Yeah,
he's trying to be diplomatic, but it's not the style of hockey he coaches that they've been playing lately. They haven't been managing the puck. They lose puck battles in the corners, and that's just more desire and physical play. Like, I equate it to, like, in basketball, rebounding. Rebounding's about desire,
yes,
and just the will to put yourself in position and to box out. Well, in hockey, it's the same thing in the corners to win puck battles. When you're battling in the corner for a puck, it looks like people don't realize when they watch a hockey game, the puck's in the corner and they're just all fighting for it. Well, there's a lot of skill and there's a lot of strength involved with coming out with the puck and being able to control it. And they've been losing a lot of those battles on the boards.
Oh, yes.
And that's not what they did last year. After the All-Star break, they just took off. And when it came to managing the puck and things of that nature, they never looked back. But they're not doing that right now.
No.
So we're going to have to see if they can find that in their game. I know they practice it all the time, but you know how that goes to whether it equates to, the game. That's another story.
Yeah, that's one thing. And if everybody's kind of slacking in that area, practicing it, I mean, you're not going full 100% at it. You're not getting any better. And so you got to practice against guys that get that desire. That's the only way you get any better. And I'm just curious to see now with your captain out, Eichel out, even though Eichel should make a return, sooner than later, hopefully. Who's somebody they might target now that they have some open space with, in the cap with those guys kind of being out of the lineup? Because I kind of looked down the list of people that are potentially on the trade block. I was looking at possible like a guy like maybe a Jason Zucker come in, because you can move some guys up. I think he can provide some third line scoring, even though he's kind of later in his career, and he is a Las Vegas guy. Right. So maybe it would be fuel that will that he's still a good player, but it's just they're limited on what they can do with the cap situation.
Right. Well, maybe it's time to. They've never really put a lot of time in giving some of their prospects a little more time to develop. And maybe this is an opportunity because they still, the luxury they have is that they bank so many points in October and November that during this period of injuries and whatever, they're able to bring up some young kids from the Henderson team and let them play a little. But maybe it's time to see what they have in the farm system with guys like Brisson, and let him find his game a little. Not this come up for 1 game, 2 game, boom, off, and they ship him back. Maybe they should put a little more time into that and let a player try and develop and have this valuable experience of playing more than 1 or 2 games. I think maybe that's the route they're going to go, because they're hoping to get most of these players back.
Yeah, hopefully for a late playoff. Yeah, hopefully for a late playoff push.
An underrated, a guy, Golden Knights fans know that missing Will Carrier is a huge loss for them. Everybody thinks of, we all think of Eichel, and we all think of Theodore, now Stone, but Carrier, he's a fourth line guy, but he's his presence and his energy and he is, when he's on the ice, everyone knows it, and the other team knows it too, because he will take a hit, he will give a hit, and he's become much better at actually shooting and handling the puck.
Yeah.
So he's been hopefully he comes back for them too, because it's not just the top line guys that they're missing, but they're missing one of their top fourth line energy guys. Sometimes they they start the games with that line.
And
pretty often.
He's always been amazing. He's always been a favorite of mine, just with his, like when we talked about the desire to win those puck battles. He's one of those guys. Every game you see, he's high energy, and that's what I love about Will Carrier. And when the team is kind of stagnant, it was amazing to see how, when that fourth line was fully together, how they could all of a sudden start igniting, get a goal, and get that team rolling.
Well, that line was a big reason why they beat Florida, because Kolasar and him and Nick Waugh was centering them at the time, and they oftentimes had to go head and head against Florida's number 1 line, and I think everyone can remember the hit Kolasar put on Kachuk that just changed the whole series, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
And right, because he was hurt the rest of the series. But I kind of lean towards they're not going to make a move, because they expect these players to be back before the end of the year. But they're gonna have to, start playing their type of hockey, like you said, blocking shots and making it a little easier on their goaltenders, because that's the style of hockey. They keep the middle clogged, and everything's from the outside, and it's very hard for teams to get the puck through, and that's the way they play. We'll see what happens.
Yeah,
but
it's going to be interesting to watch. I hope, like I said, I hope they do give some of those younger guys a chance, like you were talking about. I'd like to see some of our young Henderson talent get up there, because there is some good talent on that team, and hopefully they do give them a shot.
Yeah, Korczak actually looks like he's got almost a little bit of Theodore skill, like he's got some of that skating ability and able to shoot the puck, more so than, like, if you look at Haig and Whitecloud, they're very good defensemen, but they're not dynamic players.
No,
they're not guys that can skate and handle the puck. I think the opposing team always knows that they're looking to just give the puck, pass the puck, get it out of their zone. Yeah. So I think that they do have. That's one of the. If you look at their farm system, that's where their strength is. They got some young defensemen that some of them are going to, in the next year or two, they're going to have their chance. Because Martinez is we don't know how much more time he has. Pietrangelo he's still got 4 years left on his contract?
I think he's got 4 years left on his contract. So
I don't know if he'll make that, but we'll see.
Yeah, something that contract I think goes to, he's like 38, 36, 38, something like that. It's something he gets up there, and he's still making a good chunk of change for sure. Now, I know it's going to be difficult with us losing our captain and all the injuries to catch Vancouver. Can we hold off Edmonton to hold that home ice advantage going into that 2-3 game? That's probably where we're going to be fighting for.
Yeah, I actually think there's no chance of catching Vancouver. That's how good I think Vancouver is. I think we can hold off Edmonton, because Edmonton is still, even if you watch last night's game, it was kind of a glimpse of what can happen with Edmonton.
Mm-hmm.
They played Boston. They lost 6-5, but Skinner came down there. Skinner's been playing out of his mind for them.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll come down to earth. And once that happens, it'll become the McDavid show, which it always is. And I don't think they've really changed much to have a different result when it comes to late in the year and into the playoffs. I think the Knights are still match up well against them. If teams can shut down their top line, which Boston actually did last night, they usually can. That team can be beat, and I think that Vancouver to me is much more formidable. They look like a complete team now.
Yeah, they really do. I agree with you there. I don't think we're catching Vancouver to win the Pacific this year, which is unfortunate. I really was hoping us to come out of them strong, but with all the injuries, it's been a tough year. And like I said, I think with all that hockey we played last year, I think it's starting to take its toll. And that's why when guys repeat, when teams repeat, I think it's the most amazing thing, playing that much hockey in a one year span.
Right.
I think it's amazing.
And usually when they repeat, like Tampa did,
mm-hmm.
it's because they have a phenomenal goalie,
mm-hmm.
Vasilevsky, and when they don't have their A game, they can still win because their goalie can win them a game.
Yeah.
When your goalie can win a game or two in the playoffs, that's huge. And Demko's playing like that.
Mm-hmm.
He's playing as good as Vasilevsky did when Tampa won back-to-back. So I think that when you saw that score the other day where they allowed 10 goals, well, he didn't play.
Yeah,
Demko didn't play that night.
Yeah, Demko didn't play. Yeah. When I saw that, I was like, that was a 3 hat-trick game, right?
Yeah, they gave Demko the night off, and they allowed 10 goals. So, I mean, he's been solid all year, and we remember what he did to the Golden Knights 3 years ago.
Yep.
He basically won that series. So
that's a guy when he's on his game. Yeah, when he's on his game,
right.
he's almost unstoppable.
And there aren't many goalies like that. If you look around the league, there's only a handful that really can win you, just single-handedly win you a game or two in the playoffs. And I think that I wouldn't put Skinner in that category. And I think that Aiden Hill showed it last year. I think the Knights have a good chance of holding off Edmonton, but I think they have very little chance to catch Vancouver at this point, unless Vancouver just something drastic happens.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. Well, hey, that's all the time we have for the day. Thanks to Rick for joining us. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah, always fun. Well, we'll have to get on there again with Rick, and in the future we're going to talk a little bit of fantasy football and some hockey as well. We'll dive more into that next week, and if Rick's up to joining the show next week.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Vegas Guys Locker Room.